It is a scenario that grid planners and national security experts have theorized about for decades, but prayed would never happen. It wasn't a cyber attack from a hostile foreign power. It wasn't a physical assault on transmission lines by domestic extremists. It was a press conference in Toronto. We will immediately apply a 25% surcharge on the electricity we export. We will not hesitate to shut off their power as well. Let me be clear. I will not hesitate to increase this charge if necessary. If the United States escalates, I will not hesitate to shut the electricity off completely. With those words, Ontario Premier Doug Ford did not just escalate a trade dispute, he fundamentally altered the security architecture of North America. Ontario just weaponized electricity. In a move that has sent shockwaves from the control rooms of New York to the Oval Office, the industrial heartland of Canada imposed a punitive 25% surcharge on all electricity exports to the United States. This is not a negotiation tactic buried in a diplomatic cable. It is direct, kinetic economic retaliation affecting 1.5 million American homes and businesses in New York, Michigan, and Minnesota. For the first time in history, the sprawling, integrated machine that keeps the lights on in the American Northeast has become a hostage in a trade war. To understand the severity of this moment, one must look past the politics and into the physics of the grid. The border between Canada and the United States may be a solid line on a map, but in the world of electromagnetism, it does not exist. The North American power grid is the largest, most complex machine ever built, a singular synchronized organism where electrons flow north and south based on resistance and demand, not treaties. New York State is critically dependent on this flow. In 2024, New York imported 7.7 terawatt-hours of Canadian electricity, more than any other state in the Union. This power, valued at hundreds of millions of dollars, is the baseload bedrock that keeps Manhattan lit and upstate factories humming during peak demand. Now, effective immediately, every kilowatt crossing that invisible line carries a 25% geopolitical premium. Stephen Lecce, Ontario's Minister of Energy and Electrification, was blunt in his assessment. The United States needs Canada's power. He is right. The impact extends far beyond the three states that directly import the electrons. Ontario's electricity is often resold and wheeled through regional interconnects. When the price of Canadian power spikes by a quarter, the wholesale cost of energy across the entire eastern interconnection rises. Entire regional grids feel the pressure. Premier Ford's surcharge is estimated to generate between 300,000 Canadian dollars and 400,000 Canadian dollars per day, approximately 28,000 US dollars to 277,000 US dollars. While the Ontario government has stated this revenue will be used to support local workers and families hurt by US tariffs, the real cost is being felt in American living rooms. Ford estimated the surcharge would add approximately 100 Canadian dollars per month to the utility bills of the average affected American household. In an economy already struggling with inflationary pressure, this is a direct tax on survival. While the political rhetoric heats up, the real panic is happening in the quiet, windowless control rooms of the grid operators. Since February, the New York Independent System Operator, NYISO, and ISO New England have been frantically scrambling to prepare for exactly this scenario. They saw the storm clouds gathering not because Ontario acted first, but because President Donald Trump fired the opening salvo. When the White House announced tariffs on imports, including a controversial 10% duty on energy resources, the grid operators realized the integrated market was breaking. In early March, both NYISO and ISO New England filed emergency proposals with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC. These filings were unprecedented. They requested the legal authority to collect potential import duties on Canadian electricity if directed by federal authorities. The language in these filings reveals the depth of the anxiety. Both grid operators emphasized a critical point. Electricity should not be subject to tariffs. The grid is a reliability mechanism, not a trade good like steel or aluminum. Disrupting the flow for political reasons endangers the stability of the entire system. ISO New England noted that Canadian imports have served approximately 11% of New England's total load over the past 5 years. They estimated that a tariff war, whether a 10% U.S. duty or a 25% Canadian surcharge, could cost the region between $66 million and $165 million annually. That is not a corporate expense. That is a cost passed directly to the ratepayer. NYISO pointed out that it is interconnected with Ontario's Independent Electricity System Operator, IESO, and Hydro-Quebec, allowing for imports of up to 4,600 megawatts. The United States and Canada share one of the most integrated international electric grids in the world, NYISO stated. That integration is now a vulnerability. This electricity crisis did not happen in a vacuum. It is the latest and most dangerous rung on an escalation ladder that is rapidly climbing toward total economic decoupling. The sequence of events describes a relationship in freefall. 1. President Trump imposes 25% tariffs on most Canadian goods and a 10% duty on energy after a brief pause. 2. Canada responds with 25% tariffs on 30 billion Canadian dollars worth of U.S. imports, targeting dairy, steel, and aircraft parts. 3. Ontario escalates, weaponizing the grid with the 25% electricity surcharge. 4. On March 11, 2025, President Trump announces he is doubling tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum to 50%, effective March 12, allegedly in direct response to Ford's move. Then, a moment of vertigo. Following a tense call with U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, Premier Ford suspended the electricity surcharge earlier on March 11th. White House trade advisor Peter Navarro subsequently confirmed that the punitive 50% steel tariffs would not proceed. But let's be clear. This pause is not peace. It is a ceasefire in a minefield. The damage to the fundamental trust of the energy market has already been done. Energy markets depend on predictability. Utilities sign 20-year contracts. Investors price risk based on stability. When tariffs, counter-tariffs, threats, pauses, and reversals become the norm, the market breaks. Utilities cannot plan. Investors flee, and consumers absorb the volatility. While Ontario has paused its surcharge, the threat has metastasized. Quebec, the hydroelectric superpower of the continent, announced it is considering similar measures for its massive electricity exports to the United States. If Quebec follows Ontario's lead, the impact on New England shifts from painful to catastrophic. New England is structurally dependent on Hydro-Quebec for clean baseload power. Without it, the region would be forced to fire up old, dirty, and expensive oil and gas peaker plants just to keep the lights on in Boston. But the ultimate trump card remains in the hands of Alberta. Premier Ford has publicly called on the Western province to impose an export tax on oil. Alberta provides 4.3 million barrels of oil per day to the United States. You want to talk about a trump card that will instantly change the game? Ford asked reporters. If gas prices in the United States rise by $1 per gallon, Americans will lose their minds. Despite President Trump's claims of American energy independence, the data tells a different story. Nearly a quarter of the oil America consumes daily comes from Canada. About 60% of all U.S. crude oil imports are Canadian. If that tap is throttled, even by a small percentage, gas prices in the Midwest and on the Gulf Coast would skyrocket overnight. On the ground, state governors are watching their economies become collateral damage in a federal feud. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz issued a sharp rebuke of the president, stating that the first victims of Trump's trade war are Minnesotans struggling to pay their skyrocketing electric bill. While Minnesota Power only bought about $300,000 worth of electricity from Ontario in 2024, the fear is contagion. When the grid is stressed, prices everywhere go up. In Michigan, officials are trying to project calm. Matt Helms from the Michigan Public Service Commission indicated that the immediate impact might be small due to in-state generation. However, he admitted a deeper fear: grid reliability. Any action to limit or disrupt these flows would remove a layer of protection and make all of us, Canadians and Americans alike, more vulnerable to grid-scale outages. That is the technocrats' warning. The grid is designed to run on engineering logic, not political spite. When you start removing layers of protection, like the ability to import power during a heat wave, you are rolling the dice on a blackout. What we are witnessing is the fragmentation of the North American energy construct. For decades, the guiding principle was integration. We built pipelines, transmission lines, and interconnects because it made sense. It lowered costs, increased reliability, and improved security for everyone. That era is over. Canada has challenged the U.S. tariffs at the World Trade Organization, but the legal battle is too slow for the pace of the crisis. President Trump has threatened additional tariffs on dairy, lumber, and vehicles. Automakers like Ford, GM, and Stellantis were granted a one-month exemption, but if those tariffs return on April 2nd, the Canadian auto sector, centered in Ontario, would be devastated. Premier Ford has made it clear, the electricity surcharge is his shield against that devastation. A one-month pause means nothing but more uncertainty, Ford said. Until these tariffs are off the table, and until the threat of tariffs is gone for good, Ontario will not relent. This is what trade wars look like when they reach critical infrastructure. It is no longer an abstract negotiation about milk quotas or softwood lumber pricing. It is a direct threat to turn off the lights for 1.5 million people. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission has accepted the tariff revisions from the grid operators, effective March 1, 2025. The mechanism to collect the tax is now law. The gun is loaded. Grid operators are now required to submit informational filings every 6 months, quantifying the costs of this trade war. But the real cost is the destruction of a partnership. Ontario's surcharge may be paused, and the 50% steel tariffs may be reversed, but the precedent has been set. Energy is now a weapon. For the families in New York paying higher bills, and the factory owners in Michigan worrying about grid stability, the message is clear. The border is back. And this time, it's electric.